Well, we done heard the tink. That means that we are on live. We're getting the use out of Google Hangouts this year. All praise be to the Most High, the Holy One, giving thanks and praise once again for another opportunity to come and have this conversation about those who have gone on before us, our forefathers, the ancestors who lost their lives in this recent and continuing um, institution of slavery as it takes different forms. And so for those who joined us, this is our 14th installment. Wow. We're going to try to bust out. I don't know how my voice is going to hold up, but we have 5 more chapters to go. So definitely any volunteers out there, we would love to hear your voices. Let me see here. We have 5 more chapters to go. I think we're on chapter 16 now. Yes, we're on chapter 16. So I'm going to see how my voice holds up. Let me make sure I share this thing here. Yeah, I shared it already. And, we have a lot of people who listening to on the replay. Thanks for everybody who listens to it on the replay, who may not always be able to come and get it at the time in which we're having this conversation. So one more thing, let me just thank you. I think that might be my email who just joined us on the line. Thank you for joining us also. And for the troopers who's been here from chapter 1, don't do that. For the troopers who've been here from chapter 1, I feel you. It has been a journey. We here traveling with Mr. Charles Ball through all of his emotions and feelings and raccoon and pig catching. Yesterday was kind of heavy though, concerning the punishment that they witnessed. So I'm going to drink a little bit of this water and be right with you. Give me 1 second. All right. So here we go. Chapter 16. Let me jump back over here. He says, I could not believe it possible. Oh, let me catch us up. If, last week, I keep saying last week, yesterday, he ran away. The master that he said he would have been able to stay with died. He ended up running away. He left his dog. And now his hopes, the last thing he said, his hopes was his wife and children. So according to the story so far, he's been away for 4 years. He was kidnapped 4 years ago. I could not believe it possible that the white people whom I had just left would give information of the route I had taken. Oh, and one more thing, he stopped at that slave master's house that he had once met with his other master. So this is what he might be speaking of. But as it was possible that all who dwelt on this plantation might not be so sure of heart as were they who possessed it, I thought it prudent to travel some distance in the woods before I stopped for the day, notwithstanding the risk of moving about in the open light, for the purpose of precluding the possibility of being betrayed. I now determined to quit this road and travel together in the woods or through open fields for 2 or 3 nights, guiding my march by the stars. In pursuance of this resolution, I bore away to the left of the high road and traveled 5 or 6 miles before I stopped, going around all the fields that I saw in my way and keeping them at a good distance from me. In the afternoon of this day, it rained, and I had no other shelter than the boughs and leaves of a large magnolia tree. But this kept me tolerably dry, and as it cleared away in the evening, I was able to continue my journey by starlight. I have no definite idea of the distance that I traveled in the course of this and the 2 succeeding nights, as I had no road to guide me, and was much perplexed by the plantations and houses, the latter of which I most carefully eschewed. But on the third night after this, I encountered a danger which was very nearly fatal to me. At the time of which I now speak, the moon having changed lately shone until about 11 o'clock. I had been on my way 2 or 3 hours this evening, and all the world seemed to be quiet when I entered a plantation that lay quiet across my way. In passing through these fields, at last saw the houses and other improvements, and about 100 yards peach orchard, which I could distinguish by the faint light of the moon. This orchard was but little out of my way, and a quarter of a mile as nearly as I could judge. For the woods, I resolved to examine these peach trees and to see what fruit was on them. Coming amongst them, I found the fruit of the kind called Indian peaches in Georgia. These Indian peaches are much the largest and finest that I've ever seen, one of them oftentimes being as large as a common quince. I had filled all my pockets and was filling my handkerchief with this delicious fruit, which is on the deep red, when I heard the loud growl of a dog toward the house, the roof of which I could see. I stood as still as a stone, but yet the dog growled on, and at length barked out. I presumed he smelled me, for he could not hear me. In a short time, I found that the dog was coming towards me, and I then started and ran as fast as I could for the woods. He now barked louder and was followed by another dog, both making a terrible noise. I was then pretty light of foot and was already close by the woods when the first dog overtook me. I carried a good stick in my hand, and with this I kept the dogs at bay until I gained the fence and escaped into the woods. But now I heard the shouts of men encouraging the dogs, both of which were now up with me, and the men were coming as fast as they could. The dogs would not permit me to run, and unless I could make free use of my heels, it was clear that I must be taken in a few minutes. I now thought of my master's sword, which I had not removed from its quilted scabbard in my great coat since I commenced my journey. I snatched it from its sheath and at a single cut laid open the head of the largest and fiercest of the dogs, from his neck to his nose. He gave a loud yell and fell dead on the ground. The other dog, seeing the fate of this his companion, leaped the fence and escaped into the field, where he stopped, and like a cowardly cur, set a clamorous barking at the enemy he was afraid to look in the face. I thought this no time to wait to ascertain what the men would say when they came to their dead dog, but made the best of my way through the woods, and did not stop to look behind me for more than an hour. In my battle with the dogs, I lost all my peaches, except a few that remained in my pockets. And in running through the woods, I tore my clothes very badly, a disaster not easily repaired in my situation. But I proved the solidity of my own judgment in putting up my sword as part of my traveling equipage. I now considered it necessary to travel as fast as possible and get as far as I could before the daylight battleground. And certainly I lost no time. But from the occurrences of the next day, I am of the opinion that I had not continued in a straight line all night, but that I must have traveled in circular or zigzag route. When a man is greatly alarmed in a strange country, he is not able to note courses or calculate distances very accurately. Daylight made its appearance when I was moving to the south, for the daybreak was on my left hand. But I immediately stopped, went into the thicket of a low white oak bush, and lay down to rest myself, for I was weary and soon fell asleep, and did not awake until it was 10 or 11 o'clock. Before I fell asleep, I noted the course of the rising sun from the place where it lay, in pursuance of a rule that I had established, for by this means I could tell the time of day at any hour. Within a short period of time, by taking the bearing of the sun in the heavens from where I lay, and then comparing it with the place of its rising. When I awoke today, I felt hungry, and after eating my breakfast, again lay down, but felt an unusual sense of disquietude and alarm. It seemed to me that this was not a safe place to lie in, although it looked as well as any other spot that I could see. I rose and looked for a more secure retreat, but not seeing any, lay down again. Still, I was uneasy and could not lie still. Finally, I determined to get up and remove to the side of a large and long black log that lay at the distance of 70 or 80 yards from me. I went to the log and lay down by it, placing my bundle under my head, with the intention of going to sleep again, if I could. But I had not been there more than 15 or 20 minutes when I heard the noise of men's voices, and soon after the trampling of horses on the ground. I lay with my back to the log in such a position that I could see where I had been in the bushes. I saw two dogs go into this little thicket, and three horsemen rode over the very spot where I had lain when asleep in the morning, and immediately horses and voices were at my back, around me, and over me. Two horses jumped over the log by the side of which I lay, one about 10 feet from my feet, and the other within 2 yards from my head. The horses both saw me, took fright, and started to run. But fortunately, their riders, who were probably looking for me in the tops of trees or expecting to see me start before them in the woods and run for my life, did not see me, and attributed the alarm of their horses to the black appearance of the log. For I heard one of them say, "Our horses are afraid of black logs." I wonder how they would stand the sight of a Negro if he should meet him. There must have been in the troop at least 20 horsemen, and the number of dogs were greater than I could count as they ran in the woods. I knew that all these men and dogs were in search of me, and that if they could find me, I should be hunted down like a wild beast. The dogs that had gone into the thicket where I had been, fortunately for me, had not been trained to hunt Negroes in the woods, and were probably brought out for the purpose of being trained. Doubtless, if some of the kept dogs, as they are called, of which there were certainly several in this large pack, had happened to go into that thicket instead of those that did go there, my race would soon have been run. I lay still by the side of the log for a long time after the horses and dogs and men had ceased to trouble the woods with their noise. If it can be said that a man lies still who is trembling in every joint, nerve, and muscle, like a dog lying upon a cake of ice. And when I arose and turned round, I found myself so completely bereft of understanding that I could not tell south from north, nor east from west. I could not even distinguish the thicket of bushes from which I had removed to come to this place, from the other bushes of the woods. I remained here all day and all night. It appeared to me that the sun set in the southeast. After sundown, the moon appeared to me, to my distempered judgment, to stand due north from me, and all the stars were out of their places. Fortunately, I had sense enough remaining to know that it would not be safe for me to attempt to travel until my brain had been restored to its ordinary stability. He didn't know what was going on, which did not take place until the third morning after my fright. The 3 days that I passed in this place I reckon the most unhappy of my life, for surely it is the height of human misery to be oppressed with alienation of mind and to be conscious of the affliction. Distracted as I was, I had determined never to quit this wood and voluntarily return to slavery. And the joy I felt on the third morning when I saw the sun rise in his proper place in the heavens, the black log, the thicket of bushes, and all other things resumed the position in which I found them, may be imagined by those who have been saved from apparently hopeless shipwreck on a barren rock in the midst of the ocean, but cannot be described by any but a poetic pen. I spent this day, oopsie, sorry. I just dropped the phone. One moment, please. Thank everybody who just joined us. We're in the middle of reading 50 Years in Chains, story by Charles Ball. He's on the run and they're looking for him. He says, I spent this day in making short excursions through the woods for the purpose of ascertaining whether any road was near to me or not. And in the afternoon, I came to one about a mile from my camp, which was broad and had the appearance of being much traveled. It appeared to me to lead to the north. Sorry. A while before sundown, I brought my bundle to this road and lay down quietly to await the approach of night. When it was quite dark, except the light of the moon, which was now brilliant, I took to this road and traveled all night without hearing or seeing any person. And on the succeeding night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I came to the margin of a river, so wide that I could not see across it. But the fog was so dense at this time that I could not have seen across a river of very moderate width. I procured a long log and sounded the depth of the water, which I found not very deep. But as I could not see the opposite shore, was afraid to attempt to ford the stream. In this dilemma, I turned back from the river and went more than a mile to gain the covert of a small wood, where I might pass the day in safety and wait a favorable moment for obtaining a view of the river, preparatory to crossing it. I lay all day in a full view of the high road and saw at least 100 people pass, from which I inferred that the country was populous about me. In the evening, as soon as it was dark, I left my retreat and returned to the riverside. The atmosphere was now clear, and the river seemed to be at least a quarter of a mile in width. And while I was divesting myself of my clothes, preparatory to entering the water, happening to look down the shore, I saw a canoe with its head drawn high on the beach. On reaching the canoe, I found that it was secured to the trunk of a tree by a lock and chain. But after many efforts, I broke the lock and launched the canoe into the river. The paddles had been removed, but with the aid of my sounding pole, I managed to conduct the canoe across the water. I was now once more in South Carolina, where I knew it was necessary for me to be even more watchful than I had been in Georgia. I do not know where I crossed the Savannah River, but I I do not know where I crossed the Savannah River, but I think it must have been only a few miles above the town of Augusta. After gaining the Carolina shore, I took an observation of the rising moon, of such stars as I was acquainted with, and hastened to get away from the river, from which I knew the heavy fogs rose every night at this season of the year, obscuring the heavens for many miles on either side. I traveled this night at least 20 miles and provided myself with a supply of corn, which was now hard, from a field at the side of the road. At daybreak, I turned into the woods and went to the top of a hill on my left, where the ground was overgrown by the species of pine tree called spruce in the south. I here kindled a fire and parched corn for my breakfast. In the afternoon of this day, the weather became cloudy, and before dark, the rain fell copiously and continued through the night with the wind high. I took shelter under a large stooping tree that was decayed and hollow on the the lower side, and kept me dry until morning. When daylight appeared, I could see that the country around me was well inhabited, and that the forest in which I lay was surrounded by plantations. At the distance of 1 or 2 miles from me, I did not consider this a safe position, and waited anxiously for night to enable me to change my quarters. The weather was foul throughout the day, and when night returned, it was so dark that I could not see a large tree 3 feet before me. Waiting until the moon rose, I made my way back to the road, but had not proceeded more than 2 or 3 miles on my way when I came to a place where the road forked, and the two roads led away, almost a right angle from each other. It was so cloudy that I could not see the place on the moon of the moon in the heavens, and I knew not which of the roads to take. To go wrong was worse than to stand still, and I therefore determined to look out for some spot in which I could hide myself and remain in this neighborhood until the clearing up of the weather. Taking the right-hand road, I followed its course until I saw at the distance, as I computed it in the night, of 2 miles from me, a large forest which covered elevated ground. I gained it by the shortest route across some cotton fields. Going several hundred yards into this wood, I attempted to kindle a fire, in which I failed, every combustible substance being wet. This compelled me to pass the night as well as I could amongst the damp bushes and trees that overhung me. When day came, I went further into the woods, and on the top of the highest ground I could see established my camp by cutting bushes with my knife and erecting a sort of crude or rude booth. It was now, by my computation, about 25th of August, and I remained here 11 days without seeing one clear night. And in all this time, the sun never shone for half a day at once. I procured my substance while here from a field of corn, which I discovered at a distance of a mile and a half from my camp. This was the first time that I was weather-bound, and my patience had been worn out and renewed repeatedly before the return of the clear weather. But one afternoon I perceived the trees to be much agitated by the wind. The clouds appeared high and were driven with velocity over my head. I saw the clear sky appear in all its beauty in the northwest. Before sundown, the wind was high, the sun shone in full splendor, and a few fleecy clouds, careering high in the upper vault of heaven, gave assurance that the rains were over and gone. At nightfall, I returned to the forks of the road, and after much observance, finally concluded to follow the right-hand road, in which I am satisfied that I committed a great error. Nothing worthy of notice occurred for several days after this. As I was now in thickly peopled country, I never moved until long after night and was cautious never to permit daylight to find me on the road. But I observed that the North Star was always on my left hand. My object was to reach the neighborhood of Columbia and get upon the road which I had traveled and seen years before in coming to the South. But the road I was now on must have been the great Charleston Road, leading down the country and not across the country, the course of rivers. So many people traveled this road as well by day and by night, that my progress was very slow, and in some of the nights I did not travel more than 8 miles. At the end of the week after leaving the forks, I found myself in a flat, sandy, poor country, and as I had not been with a river on this road, I now concluded that I was on the way to seaboard instead of Columbia. In my perplexity, I resolved to try to get information concerning the country I was in by placing myself in some obscure place in the side of the road and listening to the conversation of travelers as they passed me. Oh boy, you about to go eavesdrop now. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. For this purpose, I chose the corner of a cotton field around which the road turned and led along the fence for some distance. Passing the day in the woods among the pine trees, I came to this corner in the evening and lay down within the field, waiting patiently the coming of travelers that I may hear their conversation and endeavor to learn from that which they said the name at least of some place in this neighborhood. On the first and second evening that I lay here, I gleaned nothing from the passers that I thought could be of service to me. But on the third night, about 10 o'clock, several wagons drawn by mules passed me, and I heard one of the drivers call to another and tell him that it was 60 miles to Charleston, and that they should be able to reach the river tomorrow. I could not at first imagine that what river this could be, but another of the wagoners inquired how far it was to Edisto, to which he replied, it was replied by someone that it was nearly 30 miles. I now perceived that I had mistaken my course and was as completely lost as a wild goose in cloudy weather. Not knowing what to do, I retraced the road that had led me to this place for several nights, hoping that something would happen from which I might learn the route to Columbia. But I gained no information that could avail me anything. At length, I determined to quit this road altogether, travel by the North Star for 2 or 3 weeks, and after that to trust to Providence to guide me to some road that might lead me back to Maryland. Having turned my face due north, I made my way pretty well for the first night, but on the second, the fog was so dense that no stars could be seen. This compelled me to remain in my camp, which I had pitched in a swamp. In this place, I remained more than a week, waiting for clear nights. But now the equinoctial storm came on, raged with fury, which I never before witnessed in this annual gale. At least it had never before appeared so violent to me, because perhaps I had never been exposed to its blast without the shelter of a house of some kind. This storm continued for 4 days, and no wolf ever lay closer in his lair or moved out with more stealth caution than I did during this time. My substance was drawn from a small cornfield at the edge of the swamp in which I lay. After the storm was over, the weather began to calm and clear, and I fell into a road which appeared to run nearly northwest, following the course of this road by sharp marches because I was obliged to start late at night and stop before day. I came on the first day, or rather night, of October, by my calendar, to a broad and well-frequented road that crossed mine at nearly right angles. This road crossed in the middle of a plantation, and I took to the right hand along this great road and pursued it in the same cautious and slow manner that I kind traveled for the last month. When the day came, I took refuge in the woods, and as usual, choosing the highest piece of ground that I could find in the neighborhood. No part of this country was very high, but I thought people who visited these woods would be less inclined to walk to the tops of the hills than to keep their course about along the low grounds. I had lately crossed many small streams, but on the second night of my journey on this road, came to a narrow but deep river, and after the most careful search, no boat or craft of any kind could be found on my side. A large flat with 2 or 3 canoes lay on the opposite side, but they were as much on my side as if they had never been made. There was no alternative but swimming this stream, and I made the transit in less than 3 minutes, carrying my packages on my head. It's a good thing he know how to swim. I had as yet fallen in with no considerable towns, and whenever I had seen a house near the road or one of the small hamlets on the south in my way, I had gone round by the woods or fields so as to avoid the inhabitants. Sorry about that. But on the fourth night, after swimming the small river, I came in sight of a considerable village with lights burning and shining through many of the windows. I knew the danger of passing a town on account of the patrols with which all southern towns are provided, and making a long circuit to the right, so as to totally to avoid this village. I came to the banks of a broad river, which upon further examination I found flowing past the village and near its border. This compelled me to go back and attempt to turn the village on the left, which was performed by wandering a long time in swamps and pine roads. Pine woods. For those who just joined us, I'm gonna do one chapter. I'm coming to the end of the chapter, but I'm gonna do one chapter today because my voice is, unless we have a volunteer, and then we're gonna pick up tomorrow. It says, it was break of day when I regained the road beyond the village and returned to the swamps from which I had first issued. I passed the day under their cover. On the following night after regaining the road, I soon found myself in a country almost entirely clear of timber and abounding in fields of cotton and corn. The houses were numerous and the barking of dogs were incessant. I felt that I was in the midst of danger and that I was entering a region very different from the tracts of country through which I had lately passed, where the gloom of the wilderness was only broken by solitary plantations or lonely huts. I had no doubt I was in the neighborhood of some town, but of its same and the part of the country in which it was located, I was ignorant. I at length found that I was receding from the woods altogether and entering a champion country, in the midst of which I now perceived a town of considerable magnitude, the inhabitants which were entirely silent, and the town itself presented the appearance of total solitude. The country around was so open that I despaired of turning so large a place as this was, and again finding the road I traveled. I therefore determined to risk all consequence and attempt to pass this town under the cover of darkness. Keeping straight forward, I came unexpectedly to a broad river, which I now saw running between me and the town. I took it for granted that must be a ferry at this place, and on examining the shore, found several small boats fastened only with ropes to a large scow. One of the boats I seized and was quickly on the opposite shore of the river. I entered the village, proceeded to its center without seeing so much as a rat in motion. Finding myself in an open space, I stopped to examine the streets, and upon looking at the houses around me, I at once recognized the jail of Columbia and the tavern in which I had lodged on the night after I was sold. This discovery made me feel almost at home with my wife and children. I remembered the streets by which I had come from the country to the jail, and was quickly at the extremity of the town, marching towards the residence of the poultry planter, at whose house I had lodged on my way to the south. It was late at night when I left Columbia, and it was necessary for me to make all speed and get as far as possible from that place before day. I ran rather than walked, and until the appearance of dawn when I left the road and took shelter in the pine woods with which this part of the woods abounds. I had now been traveling almost 2 months and was still so near the place from which I first departed that I could easily have walked to it in a week by daylight. But I hoped that as I was now on a road with which I was acquainted and in a country through which I had traveled before, that my future progress would be more rapid and that I should be able to surmount without difficulty many of the obstacles that hitherto embarrassed me so greatly. I was now in my power to avail myself of knowledge I had formerly acquired of the customs of South Carolina. The patrol are very rigid in the execution of the authority with which they are invested, but I never had much difficulty with these officers anywhere. From dark until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, the patrol are watchful and always traversing the country in quest of Negroes. But towards midnight, these gentlemen grow cold or sleepy or weary and generally betake themselves to some house and where they can procure a comfortable fire. I now established as a rule of my future conduct to remain in my hiding until after 10 o'clock, according to my computation of time. And this night I did not come to the road until I supposed it to be within an hour of midnight. And it was well for me that I practiced so much caution, for when within 200 or 300 yards of road, I heard people conversing. After standing some minutes in the woods and listening to the voice at the road, the people separated, and a party took each end of the road and galloped away upon their horses. These people were certainly a band of patrollers who were watching this road and had just separated to return home for the night. After the horsemen were quiet out of hearing, I came to the road and walked as fast as I could for hours, and again came into the lane leading to the house where I had first remained a few days in Carolina. Turning away from the road, I passed through this plantation near the old cotton gin house, in which I had formerly lodged, and perceived that everything on this plantation was nearly as it was when I left it. 2 or 3 miles from this place, I again left the road and sought a place of concealment. And from this time until I reached Maryland, I never remained in the road until daylight but once, and I paid dearly then for my temerity. I was now in an open, thickly populated peopled country, in a comparison with many other tracts, though which I had passed, and this circumstance compelled me to observe the greater caution. As nearly as possible, I confined my travel within the hours of midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning. Parties of patrollers were heard by me almost every morning before day. These people sometimes moved directly along the roads, but more frequently lay in wait near the side of the road. They still do today, ready to pounce upon any runaway slave that might chance to pass. But I knew by former experience that they never lay out all night except in times of apprehended danger, and the country appeared at this time to be quiet. I felt but little apprehension of failing in this in with sorry. I felt but little apprehension of falling in with these policemen within my traveling hours. Last paragraph of the 16th chapter. There were now plenty of corn in the field, and sweet potatoes had not yet been dug. There was no scarcity of provision with me, and my health was good and my strength unimpaired. For more than 2 weeks, I pursued the road that had led me from Columbia, believing I was on my way to Camden. He said believing, so we're going to see. Many small streams crossed my way, but none of them were large enough to oblige me to swim in crossing them. That was the end of the reading of chapter 16. My voice held out. Praise be to the Most High. We're going to pick up on 17 tomorrow. We have 4 more chapters left in this book. He is on his way, as he said, back to his wife and children, left from the deep south of Georgia. You know, what I'm learning from him is that even in the beginning of the book, and if anybody has anything to say, just hit me up on social media or put your comment here and I'll share it with everyone. But what I noticed from him throughout the whole book, he's very observant. And this observation that he used as a practice in remembering certain details is actually helping him to his benefit. There's some of us who You know, we can't remember. We went up the street. We don't know what the person's face looked like. We don't know what store was on the corner. We're not paying around, attention to our surroundings. And this is, if anything, I'm grasping from him that he's really diligent with his surroundings. And even though he's getting lost, he's still able to kind of find his way in nature. So that's deep. I look forward to hearing how he does on this journey here. Apparently he got somewhere because he's right in the book. So we could definitely we could definitely be hopeful that he reaches somewhere that has a publisher. So for those who joined us, this is the 14th installment. We're gonna come back tomorrow. I'm gonna rest up my voice a little bit. Hopefully we'll have some male volunteers before the end of this reading of the next 4 chapters. So definitely tell a friend if you've seen the value out of this. And if you don't have it already, I have the link. We're gonna be picking up in the beginning of February, uh, incidents in the life of a slave girl. And that's the narrative of a girl, a woman, Harriet Jacobs, and her experience in slavery with sexual harassment. So that one is going to be deep as well. Until next time, thank everybody for tuning in. Everybody have a blessed night. Shalom.